Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us on a Saturday afternoon full of Sahara dust here in Houston. Glad you're inside and attending one of our virtual author talks. I'm thrilled today to be joined with Sarah Stewart Taylor. She is the author of the Sweeney St. George series and the new Maggie Darcy series. She grew up on Long Island and was educated at Middlebury College in Vermont and Trinity College, Dublin, where she studied Irish literature. She's worked as a journalist and writing teacher and now lives with her family on a farm in Vermont where they raise sheep and grow blueberries. She's here with us today to talk about The Mountains Wild, the first Maggie Darcy book. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I love that I can be talking to you in Houston and I'm here in Vermont, and it's great. Thank you for inviting me to do this.
Well, it's our pleasure. We found that one of the few upsides to this situation is that we're all learning how to do these virtual events, and we get to visit with people who might not have come to Houston. So lucky that we get to talk to you today. She has sent us some signed book plates, which I meant to bring home and in a rush did not, but we have signed book plates for anyone who'd like to order a copy of the book. We can send one of those to go along with it. So thanks so much for being here. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. You know, this time has been strange and you know, and scary in some respects, but I feel grateful. My family is safe and well, and we're doing okay. We're hanging in there.
I think that that response is the best you can ask for from anyone at this point. You know, we're healthy and we're hanging in there and doing the best we can.
That's right.
So I forgot to say, if you're watching and you have any questions, please type them in the comments. John is behind the scenes and he will make sure that I get any of the questions that you have so that I can send them to Sarah later in the chat. So I have to say, I started working at the bookstore in 2003 when Oh Artful Death was out and was a huge seller for us. We loved that series. So I'm very excited that let's say nearly 20 years later, we're talking about a new book. Can you give us kind of a brief synopsis or elevator pitch for The Mountains Wild?
Absolutely. So The Mountains Wild it unfolds in two different time periods. And the first is 1993. And then there's another section of the book that takes place in 2016. And they're sort of interwoven with each other. And my main character, Maggie Darcy, is a recent college graduate in the 1993 section. She's working at her cousin's, her uncle's bar on Long Island. And about a year before the book starts, Maggie's beloved cousin, Erin, moved to Ireland. And as the book opens, Maggie and her uncle get a phone call that Erin has gone missing in Dublin, Ireland. And Maggie has to go over to try to figure out what happened to Erin. Her uncle isn't well, and he, for a variety of reasons, he can't do it. So she has to do it. And she gets to Dublin. She's never been before, although she's studied Irish literature, and she sort of has a lot of initially very romantic ideas, I think, about Ireland, as many of us do. And she gets there and she loves it. She kind of falls in love with the city, and she's trying to trace Erin's last weeks. She lives in Erin's house. She talks to Erin's friends. She sort of starts doing some detecting, and ultimately she has to go home, and she doesn't find any trace of Erin. She doesn't know what happened to her. And Maggie and her uncle have to live for many years with this uncertainty. And 23 years later, a new piece of evidence is found in Erin's case at the same time that another young woman goes missing in the Wicklow Mountains, close to where Erin was last seen. And so Maggie, who's now a homicide detective and the divorced mother of a teenage daughter, goes back to Ireland to see if she can, solve this case. That really changed the course of her life, and in many ways led to her becoming a homicide detective. So that's sort of the bird's eye view of the book.
And it's so good, you guys. You're gonna love it. So Ireland is so beautifully drawn in the book. Obviously, you were in school there. What other experiences have you had with Ireland, and what draw you to it being in your fiction?
So I lived in Ireland for a few years in the mid 90s. I moved there right after I graduated from college, just kind of impulsively, and worked for a couple of years, and then went to graduate school and studied Irish literature. And they were great years. I loved living in Dublin during those years. I loved traveling. I loved studying Irish history and literature. And so I think in many ways, the 1993 section of the book was very much sort of, in my memories. And it was a way of revisiting that time in my life, kind of writing those scenes and remembering what it was like to be discovering and exploring that city. But I needed to go back and do a lot of research in order to write the later scenes. And so, it's probably starting in 2013. My family will tell you that I've made quite a few trips, and I've been lucky enough to be able to stay with friends and do it in a way that made sense. And so it's actually just been this really wonderful thing in my life over the last 5 years that 5 or 7 years, I guess, that I've spent a lot more time in Ireland, and it just revisiting it has been so interesting.
Yeah, it's funny. We just had a question pop up in the comments. Did you spend time in Ireland doing research for this book? So I think we've just covered that one. So it's interesting you should say the thing about the 90s and kind of reminiscing to that time, because I may be mistaken, but I believe that Cara Black sets her books set in Paris in the 90s because that's when she lived there. And she feels like that is the Paris that she knows to write about, and as opposed to Paris of today. So it's funny that you should say that. It sounds like a similar situation.
Yeah, and I didn't know that, but that's really interesting, and I love Cara Black's writing. Yeah, I think the other thing for me that was really fun about writing mid 90s Dublin was that it was a time before cell phones and a time before, a lot of the technology that I think would have changed my experience there. I was there without that easy access to friends and family. And, in many ways, I think I had to rely, especially when I was traveling, I had to sort of rely on myself completely,
Yeah.
There were no, that time before Yelp reviews and Google Maps. It was just a very different way of being in a new place. And, and I've loved revisiting that time, I think.
It's also interesting because it was a time before the huge economic boom of the early 2000s. So I think it probably was a different Ireland, and it comes across in your writing. It's great. So this book and your writing in general has been favorably compared to Elizabeth George and Tana French. What do you think draws us American mystery readers to British or Irish crime fiction so much?
Oh, that's a good question. So, I mean, I think Tana French is, is kind of first of all, she's a singular writer. And I think she has such, she has such deep knowledge of Ireland, and her ear for dialogue is just like blows me away, and is one of the things that I love so much about her work. And so I think I think that's a unique quality that just makes her writing so great. I think that Americans have, and it may be actually two different reasons. I think Americans love English mysteries in particular. I think there's something about the sort of English village mysteries and there's an American fascination with the royal family and with the peerage system and all. I think there's something there that we could probably unpack at great length psychologically about
Yeah.
Americans and Brits. But then I think there may be something separate about Irish crime fiction. So many Americans have Irish heritage, and I think there's a real sense of just fascination with Irish culture. And I also think that Irish crime fiction right now is just fantastic. And so many of, just like the best crime novels being written right now happen to be by Irish writers. And so I think that's sort of part of it too. But I also think that some of the economic changes that you referred to have sort of created novels that I feel like Irish crime novels are really taking on, crime novels written by Irish writers,
right.
are really taking on important issues. They're really kind of addressing things that are in the news and are really sort of concern right now. So I think that's interesting too.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Sorry, I lost my left earbud. I've been fighting it the whole time, but I think we've got it back now. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine. Yeah.
Okay. So I always like to ask authors a couple things about their series characters. So the first off is, in what ways is Maggie like you, and in what ways are you different?
Okay, so Maggie and I both love to read. I think that's one of the things about Maggie that sort of prepared her for becoming a homicide detective. She says at one point in the book that that she had spent so much of her education sort of probing motive in literature and kind of trying to understand who characters are and why they do the things they do. And that's a lot of being a detective is kind of trying to read character and trying to tell from someone's actions who they are and what makes them tick. So I think we share that. We share a love of Ireland, certainly. Like me, Maggie is from Long Island, and it was kind of fun to revisit parts of my childhood and adolescence on Long Island through her.
Right.
I think we're different. She's in much better shape than I am. She's a runner, and she's like a really good runner. I'm sort of a lazy runner. She's like a marathon runner. She's in great shape. She's tougher than I am. I think she's had to become tough in her job, and so she's much tougher than I am. And she's also she's had a more I think she's had more trauma and grief in her life than thankfully I have. And I think she's really been shaped by that grief, and it's made her strong, and it's made her at the same time careful in the world in a way.
Yeah. So when you're writing, does Maggie ever take the wheel, or do you have 100% control over her?
Oh, I love this question because it's always interesting to me to see how authors answer. And, I tend to feel like I'm in control of my characters, and but there were a few things that surprised me about Maggie. And it's hard to say what they are without giving.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
But there definitely were a couple of times where I was writing and I thought we were going in one direction, and she did something that took us in a different direction.
Yeah, I think it's instead of it saying the character is taking the wheel, it's that as you're writing, you're getting to know the character better, and you find out which things are true to their actions. But it's always interesting because sometimes that question uncovers the usual, are you a plotter or a pantser? Or it can kind of, it can get into writing technique, all those things. But yeah, I have some people who say they absolutely, the character will take them not where they were expecting. So
yeah. It's never happened to me where the character just completely took over and we went off in directions that I never imagined. It tends to be, the smaller things.
Yeah. Yeah, I had an author recently say that he was planning on having his character be seduced by some woman, and when it came time to write that scene, the guy was like, absolutely not, I won't sleep with her. So everyone, the character took over. He knew better.
Better.
Yeah, so if you're just joining us, we're talking with Sarah Stewart Taylor about her new book, The Mountains Wild. I know that sometimes people tune in 10 minutes, 15 minutes into these talks, and you wonder how you can see the beginning. If you wait until this live interview is over, the whole video will be available on Facebook, plus I'll get it uploaded to our YouTube channel later this evening, so check back for that. And a reminder, if you do have questions, put them in the comments. I've gotten a few sent to me. I'll get to them in a little bit. So while we're talking about audience questions, I'm stealing this question from someone a few nights ago, but I love it, and we've already talked a little bit about motives, so we're going to go down this rabbit hole. P.D. James once said there were only 4 motives for murder: love, lust, loathing, or lucre. Do you have a favorite motive for your books?
I think one of the motives that that I love in novels and that I have used is the fear of exposure. I think that's a really interesting one, especially in sort of modern sort of online culture. And I think fear of exposure is a really powerful motive for some people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really interesting one.
So P.D. James should add a 5th.
It might be add a 5th. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a great one, because so many books, especially right now, it's the person is killed to protect a secret. That's a very real motive going around right now. So you said you're healthy. What does a normal writing day look like for you, either pre-pandemic or currently? Are you writing?
So I am writing. I've actually been so incredibly grateful. I had a book deadline for the second book in the Maggie series. And without that deadline sort of looming over me, I don't think I would have gotten very much writing done. And so I've just been incredibly grateful that I had something I absolutely had to show up for every day. And, before pandemic, my writing routine was, I would sort of, get up fairly early, get my kids ready, get them off to school. And then I'd come home, sit down at my desk, and really, have like a school day of writing. And that worked really well for me. So since pandemic, school is all around me. And it's a very different thing. But my kids have been great, and they really have handled a lot of the schooling themselves. And I would just go up to my office and say, I've got to do this. I get up very early too. That's my strategy has always been, when I need to put in some concentrated time, I just get up really early and put in the hours before everyone else is up.
While the house is quiet.
While the house is quiet, exactly.
So I see that you have lots of books behind you. Here's a 3-part reading question. So who were some of your writing influences? Who were some of your favorite authors? And then what have you read and loved recently?
Oh, good. Okay, so influences, favorite authors, and then recent reads.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. So who are some of my favorite authors? It's they're in so many different categories that I always feel like when I'm asked this question that I just sort of am like pulling them out of, I'm naming some, but there are many more. I'm actually a really big Virginia Woolf fan, and I feel like I've kind of rediscovered her lately. I love, someone else I've been kind of rediscovering, and a crime writer who who I sort of find new things every time I go back to her is Ruth Rendell.
Oh yeah.
I just it's funny. I read her a lot a while ago, and I just hadn't recently, and it's been kind of fun to go back to her. And there's so many things that she does with her. Her characters are so great, and there are things she does with her plots that are just really masterful. And so it's been kind of fun to go back to her. And then I'm so excited to read his book as soon as I get a moment. But an Irish writer who I love is Roddy Doyle.
Yeah.
It's funny. I think Americans tend to think of The Commitments when they hear Roddy Doyle in the film, which is a great film. But his novels are just, all of them are that combination of funny and tender. There's just something about it, and his new one came out this week, and I'm excited to read that.
You'll have a treat.
Yeah. So let's see. Okay, so that was I don't know if those are influences, but those are some writers I like. And then the second one was, what was the second?
So it was influences, favorites, and then recent.
Okay, I may be mixing this up a little bit, but
it's all right. It's all right.
Let's see some other favorites. A novel that I go back to quite frequently, actually, it's interesting, is Donna Tartt's A Secret History.
Yeah.
That's a novel that I just there's something about the way that novel is constructed that's just so fantastic. Let's see. Elizabeth Bowen is an Anglo-Irish writer who I actually wrote my master's thesis on her, and she's somebody I've been revisiting lately as well.
What type of books does she write? Just general literary fiction?
She wrote novels about the Anglo-Irish ascendancy in Ireland in sort of the 20s, before the Civil War, before independence, and into the 20s. She wrote novels sort of into the 30s and 40s as well. And they're very there's just something about her writing that is just it's really evocative of a particular time in history, and there are some sort of doomed romances that are just really wonderfully done. And she also she wrote one. There's a novel that's a little bit of a spy. It has a little bit of a spy plot to it too, which I think I really enjoy. So I've sort of been going back to her recently as well. And I'll think of one other favorite, but my recent reads is actually really fun because they're right on my mind. And I happen to, there's one sitting right here, so I'll hold it up. I loved Lauren Wilkinson's American Spy. I thought this was just a fantastic novel. For those who haven't read it, it's set in Burkina Faso during the Cold War, and the main character, Marie, is this just really, really well-drawn character who's, she's figuring out what it's like to be a Black woman in the FBI and the CIA during this period in history, and becoming disillusioned with it. And it's a love story, and it's a family story, and it's so well done. So that was like one of my favorite reads of recently. And then actually another crime writer I discovered this year who I just love her work so much is Attica Locke.
Yeah,
I mean,
for sure.
Oh, she's just fantastic. She just hits every single button you can hit. Great writing, great characters, great plots. It's all there. Great settings.
Yeah, she has Houston connections. Her dad actually ran for mayor here, and so we've been friends of hers and that family for years. And I'm so glad to see the acclaim that she's gotten for her books, because they're wonderful, and she's also a terrific person. So that's a bonus, for sure.
The acclaim is so well deserved, and I hope even more. I hope even more people read her. She's just fantastic.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned American Spy, because I also work with Minotaur, your publisher, and I'm good friends with your editor. And she texted me the other day to order American Spy from the bookstore. So I don't know if you've been telling her about it or what, but she,
I think I have. So we have the same taste, maybe.
yeah, clearly. It's on a very, very high up in my to read pile, but I just haven't read it yet. But everyone raves about it. I need to get to it soon.
Yeah, in fact, it's really funny. If I ever run into Lauren Wilkinson somewhere, I'll have to tell her the story. But somehow I got the idea in my head that she had actually been a spy. And so I was going around telling people, oh, you've got to read this book. It's fantastic. You know, the author was a spy, and she, you know, and then I found out she wasn't a spy, but I was so convinced that she had been because her writing is so great.
Well, that's fantastic. That's a high praise. Well, those were great answers to that, by the way. Plenty. Thank you so much. So that's the end of the questions that I have. However, we've got a couple from the comments. So Pat asks, what was the most surprising thing about Ireland to you, either now or in the 90s?
Oh, that's a really good question. So I think, you know, in the 90s, when I moved there, I'm sorry to say that I was not very well informed about Irish politics and Irish history, frankly. I think a lot of Irish Americans, a lot of Americans have this incredibly simplistic sort of black and white view of the conflict in Northern Ireland. And they, you know, this idea of it's the Catholics against the Protestants, and the Catholics, you know, and they hate the Protestants and the Protestants hate the Catholics. And it's startling to me now how much misinformation Americans got during those years and continue to get, I think, about what is an incredibly complicated situation. And obviously one that goes way back into history. And so I think that was, you know, that was one of my steepest learning curves, was just, you know, talking to people and coming to sort of understand all the many different angles and just complexities of, you know, of that situation, and how, you know, how you know, just the cruelty and the mismanagement that was there, that you know, on the part of the British government for so long, and just you know, and then just the complexities as you know, as they moved towards the peace process. And so that, I think, and obviously there's still is discussion because of Brexit, and I've sort of continued to try to learn more all the time about that situation. But I think that was one of the biggest things. And I also think that you know, I think that Americans often have this idea about the Irish as this very monolithic culture. And in fact, you know, I've so loved learning about how, you know, the increasing diversity in Ireland. And, you know, recently arrived, you know, new Irish citizens and people who have moved from other countries in the EU. And I think it's just, it's exciting. And that's been really kind of fun for me to learn about, I think.
I think that that's one of those topics too that you find a lot in modern crime fiction from Ireland, the changing landscape, diversity, all sorts of things, rather than it being, you know, the land of white people and leprechauns. So it's definitely something that is a recurring topic, just because that's what Ireland is doing. It's changing now. So we have another question. This one should be quick. Andrea asks, do you have Irish ancestry?
I do. So it's interesting because I grew up in a very Irish American community on Long Island, and many of my friends you know, it was a huge part of their family identity. And that wasn't the case for my family. We, you know, we sort of had we had sort of English, Scottish, Irish, kind of a mixture. And and I suppose you could say the sort of more English side seemed more, culturally present, if that makes sense. My father's family was from New England, and it wasn't a huge part of our family history, but I have started learning much more about it. And in fact, my mother's family has fairly significant Irish heritage and some really interesting stories. And just about a year ago, in February of 2019, I was over there and was doing some research, and actually was able to go to the townland where my mother's great grandfather was born, and before, and then he was the one who emigrated. And it's been just really fun, and there's some mysteries there that I still have to solve, but it's been fun to kind of explore that and learn more about that.
Yeah. The same person, Andrea, I assume it's the same Andrea, asked if you have any favorite places that you visited in Ireland.
Oh yes, I absolutely. I mean, I love Dublin. I love spending time in Dublin. Donegal is one of my very, very favorite parts of Ireland. I highly recommend going up there and exploring, and driving around the coastline. West Cork is an absolutely gorgeous part of Ireland. Cork is a really fun city to visit, and the towns along the southern coast of West Cork are just absolutely beautiful. So that's definitely a place that I'd recommend. I love Galway. I think people should visit Galway. On my last trip, I explored a little bit of Wexford. I'd never really explored Wexford. I spent some time driving around there. Yeah, I mean, it's all beautiful. The north is beautiful. That's something that on my next trip, I'm hoping to spend more time exploring the north. Yeah, it's all great.
Sounds like you can't go wrong. I've visited Dublin twice personally, and have always regretted not having time in the trip to rent a car and drive around the country. So that'll be another time. But I hear anywhere you go is beautiful, really. So yeah. So I came up with another question, which I normally ask and just forgot. So you said you were on deadline. You want to tell us a little bit about where the next book takes Maggie?
Sure. So I'm struggling a little bit with describing it, because many of the things I could say would give some things away to people who haven't read The Mountains Wild yet. But what I will say is that it was, first of all, it was so much fun to come back to Maggie and to kind of, really think about how the events of the first book affected her, and the decisions that she'll make as a result of what happened in the first book. So I've really loved that process. And I wanted, when I thought about the second book, I knew that she'd be dealing with the aftermath of the events of The Mountains Wild. And I knew that I wanted her, her personal life to be a little unsettled. But I wanted to show her really kind of at the top of her game as a detective. And so that's kind of, I'm really, that was sort of really my goal with the second book, is like, she is, she's there, she's working a case. She's kind of, showing all her tricks and using all her skills, and she's just doing it. And so that, I think that's what I'm loving about this book so far.
Excellent. Well, I personally can't wait to read it. So we have another question, a good one, I think. What was it like taking a break from publishing and coming back 15 years later? What changes in publishing surprised you? Anything interesting or of note?
Yeah, I like that question, actually. So I was away for a while raising my family, and I wrote books for kids in there. And I started working on The Mountains Wild just because I just missed crime fiction so much, and I sort of, I just started to think in those terms again, and it was really wonderful when that happened. And coming back after this break, in some ways it feels so familiar. I mean, a lot of the faces are so familiar, and I've been really warmly welcomed back by other writers, by booksellers, by people in publishing, and that's been just great. And I'm just like, so many of the names are familiar names, and I'm so happy they're still around. But there's a lot that's different too, and I think one of the big things that I think is just fantastic is that we're focusing on own voices and diverse voices in crime fiction, and it's great. There's so much, there's so many terrific books to read, and I'm really glad that we're talking about the structural issues in publishing, and
for sure,
and making it possible, and I think like organizations like Crime Writers of Color are just, they're just doing great work. And so I'm really happy to see that really feels like a change from when I was publishing before. So I think that's great. And I think too, the, so much of it is online and in social media now. And so that's a real difference. And there are, of course, great things about that. And I think there are things about that are tough too,
Sure. Yeah. Especially diving in right now when everything is online.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah. I think you're exactly right. I mean, that's a very recent development, all the own voices and diversity movement, but it's a long time coming, and definitely, I'm so glad to see it. So hopefully it continues very strong. So I'm going to do a little housekeeping. I always end my interviews when it's just one author, one-on-one, with some questions from the Proust questionnaire. Not too terribly difficult, but for those of you who don't know, Marcel Proust came up with this list of questions in the late 1800s that kind of are quick questions to get to know a person better, as opposed to your books to get to know you. And so I like to end with that. So I'm going to do the housekeeping again right now. So for those of you who are watching, again, this is the first in the Maggie Darcy series, The Mountains Wild. We do have signed book plates that Sarah has graciously sent us. We hope you've been enjoying this and our virtual event series, and special thanks to Minotaur Books and Sarah for her time. If you missed some of this, we'll have it up on YouTube later, or check Facebook again for the full video. As far as the store goes, we are still closed with the Houston numbers as they are. There's no way we'll be opening anytime soon, but we're doing contactless curbside pickup, mail orders, and we're happy to recommend books over the phone, through email, whatever works best for you. So that is the end of the housekeeping. On to my favorite part, the Proust questions. So what is your most prized possession? And I always say inanimate.
Oh my goodness. This is kind of a funny one, okay. But I have so my family, we raise sheep, and this is something that I got really into probably 5 years ago, and we breed sheep, and I love the lambing process and it's just been a real recent passion of mine. And a couple of years ago, my husband and kids gave me a beautiful hand-carved shepherd's crook for my birthday, and it hangs out, it hangs out by the barn, and I just love it. It's just sort of a symbol of this, this fun hobby that I've taken up.
Yeah, no, it sounds wonderful. Was that inspired at all from visiting farms in Ireland?
Not exactly. Here in Vermont, there are a lot of people who raise sheep, and in fact, my dad grew up on a farm where they had sheep for a while, and so there were members of my family who have had sheep, and it was just something that I've always loved. But I have to say, when I on my trips to Ireland, I always have fun, stopping in at sheep farms or just driving by them, and kind of seeing what they've got and how they do it and all that.
And you grow blueberries too?
We do grow blueberries. Yeah.
Amazing. I spent a summer in Vermont in Killington at a music festival in my teens, and we went blueberry picking. So, yeah.
Yeah, we live not too far from, pretty close to Killington. So
beautiful, beautiful. What is the trait you most admire in a person?
What's the trait I most admire in a person? I think engagement with life. Engage. People who are engaging conversationalists, who are who are just really kind of like in the stream of life and engaged with things. I think that's
not just blasé and don't care, like people who care. Yeah, that's a great answer. I love that answer. What talent would you most like to have?
Oh, I wish I could sing. I really can't. I have a terrible voice. And my husband has a beautiful voice. And my older son has a really, is taking voice lessons. And when I hear him sing, it's just so much fun. And it just seems like such a superpower to be able to just open your mouth and sing beautifully. So I wish I could sing, but I can't.
Well, at least you have people in the family who can, so you can at least be entertained. You can clap.
They can sing to me.
Yeah, exactly. And the final question I have for you today is, what is your idea of perfect happiness?
It definitely involves a book, a really good book, and people I love around me, and sitting on. It's funny. I have like a really specific, place I'm thinking of, but sitting on a dock, looking at a lake as the sun is setting, with a book and the people I love around me.
I don't think anyone could ask for more.
Yeah.
All right. Well, on that note, we're going to envision that idea of perfect happiness and sign off for this afternoon. Thank you again so much for your time. And I can't recommend The Mountains Wild any more highly. Lots of us at the Murder by the Book have loved it, and we highly recommend you get a copy. Thank you again.
Thank you, McKenna.